If you could press a magic button, would you? This magic button is a reset button. And if you would press it, it would recalibrate our entire world. The economy, social hierarchy, geopolitics, the environment, and our personal relationships. The slate wiped clean and the scales balanced more fairly. If this is a radical notion to you, the tradition will make no apology for it, because this is exactly what Leviticus chapter 25 describes with the Jubilee year. The Torah teaches us in Leviticus chapter 25, verses 8 and 10, let me quote those at you. You shall count of 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the period of 7 weeks of years shall give you a total of 49 years. And you shall hallow the 50th year. You shall proclaim release throughout the land for all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you shall return to your holding, and each of you shall return to your family. End quote. In other words, every 7 years, the Torah mandates a sabbatical year, a Shemitah year. We've just had one, to let the land rest, to free the enslaved, and to remit debt. In a cycle of 50 years, 7 times 7, a Jubilee year would be proclaimed, with the words still etched on today's cracked Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. King James Version, of course. Proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. How's my American accent coming along? After 5 years, right? All private land holdings would be returned to their previous owners. All debt would be forgiven and all slaves freed. It was the great reset of ancient Israelite society. Archaeologists question whether the Jubilee year was ever rigorously practiced. There seems to be little evidence to suggest that it was, but that doesn't mean the concept has no value or applicability in today's world. The Torah is obsessed with tzedek. Tzedek can be translated as justice, as in tzedek, tzedek tivdal, justice, justice you should pursue, from Deuteronomy 16:20, I beg your pardon. The verse Ruth Bader Ginsburg was passionate about quoting. This seems to be the most common translation of the word tzedek. It can also be translated as righteousness, or even in the context of honest weights and measurements, as honest, fair, or equal. Here's another quote from the Torah. You shall have an honest balance, an oznei tzedek, an honest weight, avnei tzedek, an honest ephah, it's a measurement, ephah tzedek, and an honest hin, a hin tzedek. I, Adonai, am your God who freed you from the land of Egypt. Leviticus 19:35. The word implies balance, accountability, fairness. And this is important when we examine the concept of tzedakah, often mistranslated as charity. The English word charity comes from the Latin caritas, and it has an entirely different semantic field. All right, academics, all of you, plug your ears. I'm quoting Wikipedia. Wikipedia. The word charity originated in late Old English to mean a Christian love of one's fellows. Aside from this original meaning, charity is etymologically linked to Christianity, with the word originally entering into the English language through the Old French charité, which was derived from the Latin caritas, a word commonly used in the Vulgate New Testament to translate the Greek word agape, the distinct form of love. You will quickly see that this is very different from the Hebrew tzedakah, or tzedakah. This is not to critique the Christian concept of caritas, just to point out that it is a very different form from our Jewish concept of tzedakah. Wikipedia continues with its definition of charity. Quote, the practice of charity is the voluntary giving of help to those in need as a humanitarian act unmotivated by self-interest. End quote. Interestingly, Wikipedia also cites that no such concept exists in Judaism, where tzedakah is seen as an obligation, rather than an act of beneficence. I suspect there's an over-representation of Jews in the editing community of Wikipedia. If that is the case, does it make us look a bit churlish? After all, is it not more noble to give voluntarily rather than through a sense of duty? Halakha, Jewish law, disagrees in principle. Counterintuitively to the modern mind filled with notions of individual rights and freedoms, Halakha posits that it is more praiseworthy to fulfill a commandment out of a sense of obligation than out of a sense of voluntary enthusiasm. This is not to say that Judaism doesn't have a concept of going beyond the call of duty, which we call lifnim meshurat hadin, going beyond the measure of the law. But Judaism is down to earth and does not legislate emotion, but action. This applies all the more so to tzedakah, as it becomes clear in Rambam's hierarchy of tzedakah in the Mishnah Torah, Hugenholtz tzedakah, chapter 10. The Rambam ranks his 8 levels of tzedakah from the lowest, one who gives unwillingly, to the highest, to support a fellow Jew by endowing him with a gift or loan, or entering into a partnership with him, or finding employment for him in order to strengthen his hand so that he will not need to be dependent upon others. The question is, why are we looking at this now? Tzedakah is the last of our Unatana Tokef triad, together with Teshuvah and Tefillah, which we have been examining in this Back to Basics sermon series. It is important to understand really well what tzedakah is, since it undergirds so much of our Jewish ethics, from the principles of gleaning and leaving the corners of one's field in the Torah, to the agronomoi, the rabbinic market regulators who checked honest weights as described in the Talmud, Bava Batra 89b, in case you want the reference. Hence, Jewish scholars propose translating tzedakah not as charity, but as righteousness. While this is certainly a correct and morally satisfying translation, I'm going to have the holy chutzpah to suggest an additional translation: righteous recalibration. The word recalibration is more expansive than righteousness. Recalibration carries within it the notion of balance, of enoughness, of restraint and restoration, of returning to a set point as things were intended. Our world is in dire need of recalibration. Many of you know that I lived in England for 7 years. It's where my tea habit comes from. One of my other British habits is reading The Guardian daily. This British newspaper keeps me connected to the old country, despite Brexit. And one of their areas of investigative journalism is climate change. And it is here that I came across economist Kate, I'm not even sure how to pronounce her last name, Raworth, I think, Kate Raworth, the author of a book called Donut Economics. Note the British spelling with all the unnecessary letters. Donut Economics, 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist. The premise of donut economics is not a calorific sweet treat drenched in fats and sugars, but tzedakah in the sense of recalibration. And for a Jewish audience, I would suggest that the economist uses the term bagel economics. It works just as well. If you think I should email her after Yom Kippur and encourage her to use bagel economics side by side, let me know. So what are donut or bagel economics? Raworth's book opens with a stark reminder of the world we currently live in. I quote from the book: worldwide, 1 person in 9 does not have enough to eat. In 2015, 6 million children under the age of 5 died. More than half of these deaths due to easy-to-treat conditions such as diarrhea and malaria. 2 billion people live on less than $3 a day, and over 70 million young women and men are unable to find work. Meanwhile, the world has become extraordinarily unequal. As of 2015, the world's richest 1% now own more wealth than all the other 99% put together. To these extremes of human circumstance, add the deepening degradation of our planetary home. Human activity is putting unprecedented stress on Earth's life-giving systems. Global average temperatures have already risen to 0.8 degrees centigrade, and we are on track for an increase of almost 4 degrees centigrade by 2100, threatening a scale and an intensity of floods, droughts, storms, and sea level rise that humanity has never before witnessed. End quote. Or, to cast this planetary moral failing in the words of our wise ancestors, from Midrash Shemot Rabbah, there is nothing in the world more grievous than poverty. It is the most terrible of all sufferings. Our sages have said, if all troubles were assembled on one side and poverty on the other, poverty would outweigh them all. End quote. In response to this reality, Rayworth started on a lifelong journey as an academic to rethink our most foundational economic concepts, coming up with the donuts theory instead. Rayworth coined the term because of the shape of her model, and this is a picture of it. Donut, bagel, bagel, bagel. I'll take 2 hours of it to get home. And I'll talk you through what it is. It's a fat ring with an inner space where the hole is, and an outer space beyond the boundaries of the donut/bagel. The ring is depicted as being sliced into several slices, and these are resources, several slices, showing different resources essential to the global economy: water, food, health, education, income and work, peace and justice, political voice, social equity, gender equality, housing, networks, and energy. So the outer edge of the ring is labeled ecological ceiling, the limit of what our planet can bear sustainably, while the inner edge of the ring is labeled shortfall, the limit of what society needs before it plunges into deprivation. Inside the hole of the bagel lies the frightening world of poverty, deprivation, and human rights violations, where not enough resources are marshaled to sustain the human species. Beyond the exterior of the donut dwells the terrifying world of ecological collapse and Earth systems tipping points. Both zones are colored an alarming red. The ring itself is notably green. Or, as the author describes it, between social and planetary boundaries lies an environmentally safe and socially just space in which humanity can thrive. The green ring, our utopia, avoiding both a shortfall and overshoot, is labeled the safe and just space for humanity and inclusive and sustainable economic development. If there ever was an example of righteous recalibration on a Jubilee-like planetary level, no less, then this model is it. This is the epitome of tzedakah. According to this model, we are given a deceptively simple yet daunting task. Push the reset button, balance society out, and keep on balancing it to stay within the green zone. To achieve this paradigm shift, Rayworth lays out 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist, and she lists them as follows. 1. Change the goal, meeting the human rights of every person within the means of our life-giving planet. 2. See the big picture. Invite new narratives about the power of the market, the partnership of the state, the core role of the household, and the creativity of the commons. 3. Nurture human nature. We are social interdependent, approximating fluid and values independent on the living world. 4. Get savvy with systems thinking. 5. Design to distribute. Inequality is not an economic necessity, it is a design failure, she writes. 6. Create to regenerate. Regenerative design in order to create a circular, not linear economy, and to restore humans as full participants in Earth's cyclical processes of life. 7. Be agnostic about growth, overcome our addiction to it. This is not a model built on growth, acquisition, expropriation, or exploitation. It is a holistic model that reminds us of the fundamental interconnectedness of all life and our sacred obligations toward each other. Rayworth is candid in that her book does not offer easy answers. I quote, "These 7 ways of thinking don't lay out specific policy descriptions or institutional fixes. They promise no immediate answers for what to do next, and they are not the whole answer. But I am convinced that they are fundamental to the radically different way of thinking about economics than that this century demands." End quote. And perhaps that can be frustrating for us to hear. Wouldn't it be nice if we were presented with a quick fix or a complete instruction manual? We are given an instruction manual, of course. It's called the Torah. But to be honest, sometimes the Torah's instructions feel more like cryptic IKEA diagrams than a fully fleshed out policy paper. So too it is with the principles of tzedakah, righteous recalibration, Shemitah, the sabbatical year, and Yovel, the Jubilee. I think this is the point, similar to what Rayworth says in her book. Being overly prescriptive may stifle our creative impulses, mire us in ideological rigidity, and interrupt the flow of our moral imagination. It is up to us and our future generations. Rayworth lays out the date, 2050, to envision and recalibrate this new world collaboratively. We feel the urgency of the call, but also experience the constraints of the human condition. Coming out of this unenviable and inevitable tension is a possibility where we sit with our dreams and let them build our character, moral sensibilities, and spiritual connection before actualizing them. Yom Kippur is the dramatic reenactment of redemption. We are cosplaying the Messianic era. Today, the world that ought to be is overlapping with the world that is. This is why we call out Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Vaed loudly after the recitation of each Shema. This is why we close out with the Tekiah Gedolah, the resounding final shofar blast on the threshold of utopia. This time is a time for us to recalibrate our neshamot, our souls, so that we can pick up the work of recalibrating our world. Yom Kippur gives us, as Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel would term it, both moral grandeur and spiritual audacity. We can push the reset button, or many small reset buttons. Let us sit with our thoughts, then rise with our prayers, only to work with our hands. We will bear witness to the unfolding of a kinder world, and let, in the world of theologian Thomas J. Oord, God work to establish loving societies and civilizations through us. Now you may remember that I quoted Leviticus chapter 25, verses 8 and 10 when talking about the Jubilee, but I was a little bit sneaky. I purposely omitted verse 9. This is verse 9. Then you shall sound the horn loud in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, Day of Atonement. You shall have the horn sounded throughout your land. End quote. It is no coincidence that the most expansive vision of justice that the Torah gives us, a prefiguring and foreshadowing of our ultimate redemption, happens on the 10th day of the 7th month, Yom Kippur. As we move through the final viduis of the day, and as we tap ourselves on the chest with gentleness, and consider this image, we are invited to press the reset button and start our journey of liberation. Gemar Chatima Tova.